So Julie Anderson is going to share with us her legal update, what we need to know as we're working with our tenants, because there's some legal ramifications to what we do. Maybe not right this second, but I know she doesn't want to have to defend us in court in 3 or 4 months.
Wow. Well, hopefully we can get to court in 3 or 4 months. It's looking more like 5 or 6. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to try and cover really a significant amount of information today. I am, as a public service, drafting and blogging about issues, legal issues that are facing real estate investors. A little bit about me is that I'm the managing partner of Anderson & Associates. I have 13 staff. I'm licensed to practice law in Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska, all of the relevant federal courts and bankruptcy courts. And I exclusively represent real estate investors. When people talk to me and say, what do you do? I'm in the business of keeping real estate investors in business. That's pretty much what it sums up with. I have a transactional department, an eviction department, a collection department, and we're in and out of the federal courts trying to recover assets for those of you that are involved in some type of bankruptcy as a creditor. I'm also constantly suing people or defending real estate investors when they're being sued. Today, really what I'm going to talk to you about is what should you be thinking about in the middle of this crisis from a legal perspective during a global pandemic. What's really important to you. I've kind of summed it up in 4 categories. First of all, you just need to be worried about your own health, the health of your family, the health of your employees and your contractors, and then the health of your tenants as well. You don't need to hear from a lawyer that you should wash your hands and cancel your spring break plans. First and foremost, as I'm going through this presentation, I want you to know that I think your number one goal has to be to keep yourself safe and healthy, and to keep your employees healthy and safe, and your tenants. Next, you need to take steps to understand what's going on. This is a good first step. There's a lot of reading out there, but I implore you to seek information from reliable sources. I'm just seeing so much fake news, even in our local media, as they're covering these tenant issues. It's just a lot of bogus things. I'm going to try and not say any 4-letter words. And people are trying to take advantage of others, and it's getting kind of crazy out there some days. Third, you need to be thinking about the health of your real estate investment business. A good cash flow right now is going to be imperative for the next steps for your real estate business. So you probably are experiencing some stress. I think a lot of my clients are under pressure. Their tenants are under pressure. So you have to keep your eye on the ball, and that is good cash flow now for yourself. And fourth, I'm really going to stress this at the end. Asset protection is becoming incredibly important. There are more people at home now than there have ever been. Their children are home. Other people are moving in with them. Right now, our mayor in Kansas City is even looking to put all homeless people into apartments. So your tenants are under stress and pressure. And honestly, we're just seeing a lot of poor decisions. I'm working closely with the police department on how we're going to be moving forward some of our more violent cases right now. And nobody loves to hear this, but your risk of being sued right now is probably higher than you've seen it in many, many years, just because we have so many people at home, which just exponentially raises your risks as an investor. So just as a tiny overview, nobody really needs to know what is coronavirus, but it is an infectious respiratory disease caused by a virus. It is now in all 50 states and 4 territories. The President of the United States has declared a federal state of emergency. What does that really mean from a legal perspective? Well, most states, right now all states, have followed suit in declaring a state of emergency except for West Virginia. And the reason we're doing this is that it invokes wartime powers and the ability for states to receive emergency federal funding, which is going to be important when we're talking about how a lot of things are about to be funded. Currently, numerous states, counties, and cities have issued orders to stay home, either until a date certain or until an unknown date from further order of the government. These orders are intended to restrict the movement of people as a mass quarantine strategy for suppressing the spread of this epidemic. I listed for you here the states that have stay-at-home orders. Even though Missouri is not a state that has one, we have them locally in numerous jurisdictions. Okay, so what are the exceptions? Just, of course, a blanket stay-at-home order would say you cannot leave the four corners of your residence. I like to talk about the exceptions, and I'll get a little bit more specific with you, but I don't want to get down in the weeds. I like the analogy of live, work, play. So each government and jurisdiction have carved out these exceptions to the stay-at-home orders, why you can leave your house and when you can leave your house. Live, work, play. Play is gone. You cannot leave your house to play any longer. Work is kind of this quasi-in-between area. And then activities that keep people alive are permitted. All of the local ordinance have made an exception for you as a real estate investor or housing provider. Some of the ordinances are a little unclear as to your construction workers and maintenance staff, but we have been seeking clarification, and I'm really not seeing many people in trouble because their housing providers and their staff are out on the streets. I heard earlier about carrying a letter. Again, I work closely with the police department. They're not interested in pulling people over, to be honest. They don't want any more exposure to germs than necessary. I have posted on my website for you, just so I don't have to get into every single jurisdiction. Our website is MO for Missouri, KS for Kansas, law for the law.com, so mokslaw.com. Under our forms tab, I have started a coronavirus column, and I've kind of summarized all of our local jurisdictions, who is essential and who is not essential. But essentially, you are essential as housing providers. And I'm saying that with great certainty in all of these local ordinances. So now I want to get into what's going on with the courts. It's a scary time. It's a really unknown time. I personally feel like the executive orders that we're seeing from the governors are predominantly following party lines. On the Kansas side, we're seeing Democratic gubernatorial meetings. So some of our Kansas ordinances and executive orders look similar to California and New York, whereas in Missouri, we're seeing much more conservative executive orders coming from the governor. So when it comes to our Supreme Court and our governor here in Missouri, many, but not all of our Missouri courts are effectively closed for general civil litigation purposes. Virtually all of our courts are at a standstill in that we cannot litigate and we cannot obtain many kinds of orders. So we cannot be litigating right now eviction lawsuits. We cannot conduct any lockouts right now. We are having quite a bit of difficulty in enforcing tenant obligations, meaning some of those more behavioral evictions. Great news, or at least good news for us in Missouri, is that we are continuing to file lawsuits and we are continuing to process summons, which means we are continuing to move the court process forward up to the point of judgment and up to the point of lockout, depending on where we were in these cases. We are expecting a significant delay once the courts reopen, but from an overall litigation perspective, our Missouri courts are functioning in a way in which I have been very pleased, meaning if you have tenants who haven't paid you rent since December, or you have tenants who are behaving very poorly, we're moving in a pretty healthy way in Missouri. Now for a little bit not wonderful news for us. In the state of Kansas, all of our executive orders are far more strict and confusing for many people, including lawyers. I wish that I could tell you with clarity what some of these mean. I have been on the phone with attorneys in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in New York City, trying to interpret how they're going to be handling the same orders from their governors. So all of our Kansas courts are effectively closed for general civil litigation purposes. We cannot litigate or obtain any court orders. We cannot file any evictions. We cannot file or process any writs or lockouts. there is a moratorium on evictions. And the way the governor has stated this is there is a moratorium on evictions if the tenant's default or lease violation is substantially caused by a coronavirus hardship. So I wish that you could all wish me luck in the upcoming months, as I'm going to have to start arguing about, whose drug addiction and who punched their spouse in the face and whether or not that was substantially caused by stress from coronavirus. But we will make the arguments as we have to. There is a lot of confusion county to county as to when these courts are going to reopen. Right now, some of them have said that they will be reopening on May 1st, and some have said that they are closed indefinitely. It is impossible for me at this moment to enforce any tenant obligations in the realization of eviction in Kansas. We are expecting a very significant delay when the court system reopens in Kansas. I kind of want to explain to you before, I know it excites a lot of people and anger. I want to talk about what is the purpose of these executive orders. I think what's happening is governors want to maintain the status quo during this emergency period. What I don't want you to think this means is this is not a waiver of an obligation to make a payment. This is not obligation to behave appropriately in your apartment. This is kind of a deferment until these emergency orders are lifted. Things are moving very quickly. One thing I might tell you today, honestly, it may change tomorrow. It may change again tonight. I have on my desk 37 executive orders coming down from numerous courts. And so now I'm going to answer some of the biggest questions that we're getting here as people are calling into my office, and what I think you would be asking. Essentially, what should you do if your tenant does not pay the rent? Number one, I just implore you, please follow your policies and procedures. You have got to treat everyone the same, regardless of their race, their color, their religion, their national origin, their age, their sex, their pregnancy, their citizenship, their family status, whether or not they're disabled. So you've got to continue from a baseline perspective to follow the terms of your lease. I'm not saying go be an asshole, but I'm saying is if rent is due on the 1st, it's due on the 1st for every one of your tenants. Do not start choosing just willy-nilly who you're going to work with and who you're not. You have got to just come at this from the perspective of everything under my lease is the law of my land and my policies and procedures. But then number two, be sympathetic. Provide your tenants who are struggling with a list of resources. Thanks to Landlords, Inc. and a couple of other resources, we have been able to put together for you a list of tenant resources, print it off and hand it to your tenants. Help them help themselves. Be compassionate. You want your tenants to pay. Number three, for tenants who request an accommodation, and I want this to be really important because I hear a lot of landlords saying, I'm willing to work with my tenants. Okay, great, but let's be smart. They are requesting an accommodation because of their current situation to your policies and procedures and to your lease terms. So treat it like any other accommodation. You need to require demonstrative proof that the tenant is unable to pay their rent due to coronavirus. So I've posted on my website, again in the coronavirus column under the Forms tab, a form you can give your tenants, which is a request for accommodation to your policies. Don't just say, I'm going to work with this nice lady because she's so nice, but I'm not going to work with this other tenant because he yells at me. What happens to be like that tenant that yells at you is a different race than the woman who's very nice to you and a different sex. Just all across the board, if people need accommodations, treat it like an accommodation, like we would if somebody was asking for an accommodation to your pet policy or an accommodation to any of your policies. And finally, I just really want you to keep everything in writing. If you choose to across the board work with your tenants, I don't think that's a particularly good financial decision, but I'm okay with it. You just need to put in writing with each and every tenant what you're doing and what they're agreeing to. I frankly don't want landlords out there in the world making these agreements up themselves, so I did it for you. Under our website, under the Forms tab, I have a repayment agreement that you can just download, put your logo on it. It's in Word format, fill it out, add it to the tenant file. I'm hearing a lot of clients who are calling in and saying, I don't want to be a jerk. I feel uncomfortable or I'm hesitant to file for eviction right now in Missouri and even in Kansas. I kind of have to tell you that there's going to be so much delay. We are uncertain as to how many months of a delay it's going to be. But the best advice I can give to people who care about their cash flow is that you're going to need to get in line, meaning the first cases that are filed are going to be heard first and, locked out first, which means if you feel bad now, 3 months from now, you're going to feel worse when myself or another attorney has to tell you that you're going to be 8 months or more potentially without rental income. So at any point in time, if you choose to file a case, we can always dismiss it. We can always continue it if you're working with the tenant. But it could be pretty devastating from a cash flow perspective if you just start a policy of, oh, if my tenants don't pay me, that's no problem. What you're really doing is you're degrading the value of your own business by saying, I'm not a priority. We are continuing to file evictions. Again, you can work with people while these evictions in Missouri are pending. We are also queuing up a significant number of Kansas evictions for various reasons. We will be filing those literally bulk. Kansas lets me do something called bulk filing, so I can file a significant number of cases at one time. I will be doing that the moment that the courts reopen, and we'll be taking those in the order in which they come in. So that's a little bit about what should you do if people aren't paying you. Well, let's talk about right now, what should you do if your tenant's conduct is endangering others? I think we're all familiar with the images of the kids that were partying on Ocean Drive in Miami Beach a couple weeks ago. Relatively reckless disregard for what is going on with the health of our world. There are now some rumors, this is coming out of both New York and California. I'd like to think that their youth are a little bit more stupid than ours, but who knows? There's this kind of, it's like Russian roulette. It's like coronavirus parties. And while it sounds stupid, it's happening. So, and I really don't want any of you to be naive to believe that any of those people own their own homes. They are not having coronavirus parties in their own homes that they own. They are renting properties, and so they're doing this in their rental properties. We are seeing, some violations of the stay-at-home orders, which really endanger others. It's becoming a great source of concern, particularly in the multifamily housing community. Plus, again, everybody is in their home or in your asset, and they're all in your common areas, and they're all under stress. They're drunk, and they're violating lease provisions on a semi-regular basis. So my best advice to you is, again, follow the terms of your lease. Follow your own policies and procedures regarding notices about lease violations. Issue those termination notices now in both states. The Kansas orders from the governor do not say that you're not supposed to follow the terms of your lease. They say you cannot evict your tenant. Well, I couldn't evict your tenant in Kansas if I wanted to. I can't get anything filed in the court. The court is closed for the purpose of civil litigation. But it's not, the world is not closed for the purpose of notifying your tenant that they're violating the law or the terms of your leases. Use the police. Call the police. If people are being stupid, calling me, well, I might say, I'm sorry. You need to call the police. And I still want to believe that in the most egregious of circumstances that I could obtain hearings in both states if I absolutely needed to. I think it would need to be a terribly egregious situation for me to get the attention of the judge, but I have had numerous conversations now about a couple of cases involving drugs and violence, And I believe that we will be getting court dates a lot sooner than you're seeing necessarily in these executive orders. So the next thing that I'm kind of seeing is I'm getting a lot of questions about, what should I do if my tenant requests maintenance? I have a really high maintenance tenant. What should I do about their numerous calls? Or all these people are home and freaking out and they're calling me all the time and they want me to come over. As we've discussed tonight, you are an essential business, which means you or your staff or your contractors can leave their house to go to the rental property to maintain the property. But I really feel like right now you need to weigh the safety of yourself, your staff, and your tenants with the severity of the maintenance request. So you need to be asking yourself, is this essential to the livability of the unit? I really don't care if the tenant's blinds are falling down right now, and I don't know that I necessarily care if their washing machine isn't working. But, if there's sewage backing up in the basement or they don't have heat or air conditioning, I think that you still need to get over there and take many precautions for your safety and for those of your staff. I believe that once we are back in session with the courts, that the court is going to be looking at the totality of the circumstances and ruling on any habitability counterclaims from your tenants. I'm sure there will be many tenants who are saying, oh, you didn't respond to everything that I did during this time, but I think that we will be successful in the defense of those habitability counterclaims. What should you be doing to protect your asset in this time of uncertainty? I want to stress to you that now more than ever, asset protection, it really needs to be important to you. If you recall my kind of coronavirus party scenario, what do you think would happen if that was your property? What if people start to become sick and, God forbid, people die? Who do you think is going to get sued? I can assure you it's not going to be that unemployed millennial in Unit 2B. It is going to be you, the owner of real estate. Again, I'm not trying to freak you out, but the reality of this situation is that as lawyers, this is probably something that I say worse about lawyers. Lawyers want to sue people that have money. They don't want to sue unemployed millennials, regardless of how reckless they are. I can't tell you all the reasons why landlords have been sued before, but I can tell you that it is more important to have insurance as a first line of defense than I've ever really felt like it was before. Your insurance carrier should be kind of on the top of your list of important people that you're working with right now, just because let's protect what you've already built. It's such a part of the health of your business. And then how do you limit your personal liability? A first line of defense, as I'm talking with you about this, is if you should get sued for some reason, maybe not just for this, but for anything. I mean, people get bitten by a dog, people slip and fall, people get electrocuted, they're in your house. So they're in your asset, doing dumb things, under a lot of stress right now. 1, insurance should cover you. 2, even if you don't have insurance, I don't want them to come after you and your spouse individually. So I'm still seeing a shocking number of people that are renting their properties out in their individual name and oftentimes jointly with their spouse. Ouch. In my opinion, this is business suicide. It's just financial suicide to put that risk on everyone individually. Again, there's a million reasons why landlords and real estate investors have been sued in the past. I mean, I'm constantly involved in some sort of litigation about bed bugs or lighting or security or dog bites or this or that. But don't let this liability fall back on you personally. Have the ability to walk away without having to make payments personally. And so setting up an LLC, I can't stress enough how important it is. It's put it at the top of your list if you haven't already done it. A lot of my clients are saying, like, I don't want to have to pay to set up an LLC. I agree, you can do it yourself. Here's where I become concerned about my clients that do it themselves. They don't draft sufficient operating agreements, and then they don't follow the terms of an operating agreement. So just having an LLC but not having an operating agreement and not having any essentially processes and procedures means that anybody could just come and pierce that LLC. So those of you out there who are saying, yay, I have an LLC, I want to say this. Do you have an operating agreement? Are you following the terms of your operating agreement? Are you holding your money separately? Do you have good accounting procedures? Do you have good legal setup? Also, how many assets do you have in that LLC? We want to make sure that you're not risking, one investment with the liability of another. Those are things that you should be, generally thinking about. As we talked a little bit earlier about privacy, right now, as people are acting nuts, I have to say, how can real estate investors protect and preserve their privacy? While this might not be entirely possible for you at this time if you didn't set things up quite right, I really want to encourage you to take steps now, or if you're going to be setting up an entity, to take steps to shelter your identity from your tenants and from public records. Commonly, we'll set up what I call like a blind LLC, meaning you'll name me, Julie Anderson. I think I'm the founder of, 2,000 LLCs, and I'm the registered agent for the same. So they don't necessarily know who the owner of that LLC is. We frequently also work with blind trusts that are holding LLCs. I have a lot of stories about tenants that have publicly defamed their landlords or the owners of real estate on the internet, tenants who are showing up at people's private homes, even tenants that have become violent. It's my best advice to you is you don't have to be honest with your tenant about what your role is. I mean, you can be the owner, and they don't need to know that you are the owner. They can think you're the manager. They can think you're the person that tends to their maintenance requests. There's no obligation for you to be honest, out there in the world as to what you own, where you own it. We have all these legal tools in place to help real estate investors, remain anonymous. And I think you should take advantage of them, particularly in a time in which we don't know how litigious this movement is going to be. I'm getting a number of calls from people, and I think there's just kind of a lot of buzz, if you haven't heard it yet, people talking about what is force majeure. Force majeure essentially means an unavoidable accident in Latin. Lawyers talk in all these terms of Latin, but it just means like something out of the party's control. And it's a very common clause in contracts, especially commercial leases. I don't really see it a lot in residential, but it essentially frees the parties from contractual obligations when an extraordinary event occurs. Some of the times in which we've seen through case law these clauses be enforced are times of war, times of strike, riots, acts of God, floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes. In practice, most of the force majeure clauses do not excuse the party's non-performance entirely. They just kind of suspend it for the duration of some event. We don't know exactly whether or not coronavirus is going to be considered in this category, but it likely will be considered. Force majeure in any given circumstance in both Kansas and Missouri is going to be governed by the laws of your contract. So whatever your lease says is what will be the governing provision. Most of you probably do not, in the residential sense, have a provision like this, but you might. If I drafted it, it will say explicitly that this provision does not suspend the obligation to pay rent. So people still have to pay rent, but perhaps they don't have to abide by other obligations under the contract, such as remaining open for a certain number of hours. We see this in commercial buildings where a lot of commercial landlords will tell tenants, they have to sell a certain number of donuts or they have to be open a certain number of days per week. That kind of obligation would be suspended during this time of crisis. I want you to know that I expect to see this term being used a lot by tenants and by tenant advocates in the upcoming months. And I do expect to see some pretty creative lawyering ahead. I personally do not think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a problem for real estate investors on the residential side. On the commercial side, we'll kind of have to see how this plays out in the upcoming months. But again, if a lawyer drafted the provision, most likely this has nothing to do with the obligation to pay. It has to do with the other underlying obligations of the parties. And then what should I do, or what should you do as a real estate investor if you cannot pay your mortgage? I'm getting a lot of questions about that. There's still a lot of information. I know MAREI is going to be providing, a lot of information for people in the upcoming weeks as well. I do want to say it is admittedly scary to become a debtor when real estate investors that I represent, they are the creditors. You're the one who's seeking money and profit from others in your business, not necessarily the one that has become the person obligated. Number one, do not stop paying your mortgage. Maintaining a high credit rating is going to be important for you as a real estate investor. Let's just not throw away your credit rating. Two, I think it's important if you start to have financial issues that you are proactively reaching out to your lenders, working out a plan. I am seeing an increasing number of loan servicers and mortgage banks, essentially, small and large, that are providing various types of investors with forbearance agreements, loan modifications, waiving assessments of penalties and late fees, and suspending reporting to credit bureaus of any past due balances. If you wanted to qualify or need to qualify for some of these, you're going to have to show a hardship, most likely, fill out a written application, and obtain approval from your lender in writing. You will also be obligated to agree not to evict any tenant based on non-payment of rent or, a default during your forbearance period. I caution investors to just run to their lenders for a forbearance agreement out of fear, and that you will not be able to collect rent, essentially. I mean, all your tenants could just stop paying you. And as Robert mentioned earlier, you will be obligated to repay that amount of money, but it will be increasingly difficult for me after your tenant has been allowed not to pay rent for 3 to 6 months to try and get you that back rent. Plus, you're really training your tenant to say, it's okay that you don't make my business a priority. So obviously, these are wonderful resources if you absolutely need them. I just caution real estate investors that, if you want a break, you're going to have to give your tenants a break. And once you give your tenants a break, most of them will get used to not paying you rent. And I believe just from practical life experience and legally, I mean, they're just never going to pay you. During this time of crisis, stick with those policies and procedures, be kind and accommodate people. My parting advice to people with that, success in these circumstances is going to be largely based on your discipline to confront the facts of your current reality and not just be out there having faith that it's all going to work out. You really need to hunker down. Let's look at the law. Let's have good written policies and procedures. Keep things in writing. Remain disciplined about that cash flow because, I have received phone calls from landlords who are just like, I'm just going to forgive all the rent. I just feel so bad and I just don't know what to do, and, kind of hysterical. I mean, that's not discipline. Discipline is what I really believe is going to make people, win or lose during this period of time. So I'm going to see if I can.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. I tried really hard to answer as much as I could, as kind of address as many topics as I could as quickly as possible. I am my attorneys. We obviously are seeing some slowdown on this side too, as all the courts are closed, which is something that we never expected to see in our lifetime or ever. So we are starting a pretty aggressive blogging campaign where we're going to be out there almost every day telling people, don't lose your mind, stick with your policies and procedures. We've just decided probably in the first few days of this crisis that it's a lot easier on my operating systems to provide free information from reliable resources on our website. And I'm happy to be out there writing forms for you so that you're not downloading things from other states or from the internet or from your friend.
I just want to thank you, Julie, for your continued support of the community and offering resources to